Hello, I'm Mr. Riggs, and last year I set a goal for myself to rough turn at least 1,000 bowls in 6 months. Now, rough turning a bowl on a lathe means that I use freshly felled trees that we would call green wood to turn a really thick bowl that can then be allowed to dry for months or years, and then put that bowl back on the lathe to finish turn it. The reason for rough turning is it gives me a better and more efficient use of my raw materials. It allows me to get more bowls from the same amount of wood, and once the roughed bowls have been properly stored, they'll only get better with age and will always be ready to make a finished bowl from. Whereas if I just cut boards from a log, they have a tendency to warp and crack and split, especially on the ends of a board, so there's always some loss. If done properly, I will get more bowls out of the same amount of wood in less amount of time. But this all starts just with acquiring the wood. And it all starts with where the wood comes from. In total, I went through 19 logs. And these are full logs of wood, anywhere from 8 to 12 foot long. I got 4 logs from people working in their yards. I got 2 logs from a local tree service, and they dropped them off down here for me. And then I got the other 13 logs from a local sawmill. For the stuff in people's yards, I just backed up to it with my truck, and I had my chainsaw, and I cut the wood, I cut the log up into rounds and then loaded them into the back of the truck. It's the most labor intensive way to do it by far. So once I've got the wood back home, or at least close to the shop, I've got to cut it up into smaller pieces so it can make its way to my lathe. For the large slabs done on the sawmill, it's pretty straightforward to break down those 8 foot plus long slabs into more manageable sizes so I can get them in the shop to the bandsaw, where I can follow the drawn circles and cut out my turning blanks. For the logs that I cut with the chainsaw, it's a bit different. I usually cut off the ragged ends of the log, and then I measure the widest diameter of a bowl that I can get, and then I cut a length that's slightly longer than that measurement. Then I can take that block of wood and spin it around and start cutting slabs from it. I cut one right from the middle of the block that contains the pith. That's the very center of the tree, which is very unstable wood. This will usually leave me with 2 slabs that can be used for bowls, one on each side of the pith. And depending on how off-center the pith is, I can sometimes even get 3 of those slabs from one block of wood. Or if it's a really big tree, but I can't put it on the sawmill, but I can cut it with the chainsaw, I can get 3 slabs out of one piece. Then I can just scribe my circles and mark center on that large flat face of the wood, and then it's ready for the bandsaw. At the bandsaw, it's pretty simple. I want to take those squarish blocks of wood and get them close to round. I don't exactly cut them into perfect circles because the bandsaw blades I buy just don't like going around corners. So they more look like stop signs. They look like octagons. And then if I cut away the corners and drill a hole for center, then it's more or less ready for the lathe. Doesn't sound like much, but that can take more than an hour first thing in the morning if I'm just getting those big blocks ready for the lathe. And then on the lathe, I've got a shop-made screw chuck. And as you can see, it's just that big screw goes into the center hole that I drilled in the center of the piece of wood, and it's an incredibly fast and efficient way of mounting wood on the lathe. If I had to fumble around with a face plate and center it up and then put a whole bunch of screws in it and thread that onto the lathe for every single piece of wood, I'd hate to think how much time I would waste doing that. So now finally I can do some turning. I knock down the rest of the corners and I just try and get the wood round. I have to start slow because the wood isn't round yet. But if I did a good job cutting a well-balanced blank, then I can usually increase the speed pretty quickly, which allows me to work faster. And I true up the top and bottom face of the blank. I work the profile, and I turn a tenon on the base of the roughed out bowl, and that's going to be gripped by a 4-jaw chuck for hollowing. I could hollow out the bowl with the same gouge I used to profile the outside, but I feel like I can almost double my material by saving the inside of the bowl through coring it. It does take a special tool, and there are several on the market, but this is the one I have. It takes a carbide cutter through an arc into the wood and allows me to get another saleable bowl out of this chunk of wood instead of just more shavings on the floor. I core out all of the large bowls, and then I remount the cores on that same screw chuck so I can turn a tenon on that base, flatten it off. Then I can put the large bowls in the 4-jaw chuck, get them cleaned up on the inside because I want an even wall thickness on my bowls so they will dry and warp evenly. And then the cores can go in the 4-jaw chuck, and then they can be hollowed out with the bowl gouge, nice and simple. Once all the bowls are rough turned for the day, I usually have to clean off some shavings. They get everywhere. And I label every bowl with the date and the wood species, and finally stack them and store them away from all the elements and any strong winds. Whew. It was a lot of work. And I did that for every single bowl that I turned over these 6 months. This video is taking so long to make that I can actually show me finished turning a cherry bowl from the very beginning of the rough turning season. The reason I gave myself 6 months for this goal is because the best time to get trees is in the wintertime, or the fall and winter. There's less sap and less moisture in the tree during the colder seasons. And without the heat of summer beating down on the wood, it's more likely to not crack. Here are a couple of bowls that I finished out of that cherry. They've got just a tiny bit of warp to them. They've moved just a little bit, but they turned out gorgeous. They really did. So it's been almost 8 months for those bowls, for those roughed out bowls, to sit and dry and lose their moisture. And then I finish turned them. They still ended up warping just a tiny bit, but it's barely noticeable. So if I had left this as a board, it would have taken many years for it to dry, because this is like 4.5 inches thick. So the rule is a year per inch plus a year. So if it's 4.5, that would take 5.5 years. And even then, when you hollow out the inside of the bowl, it alters the stresses in the wood so much that even lumber that's completely dry as a board, once you hollow it out, it can warp dramatically once you turn it into a bowl. So overall, this was a success. I got just over 1,000 bowls in exactly 6 months. And there were several times where I really thought I wasn't going to make it. And I'm surprised at how much life tried to pull me away from being consistent rough turning all of these bowls. But it's a bunch of stock that is now built up that I can sell, and I have a couple stores, retail stores, that have my bowls in them. They're doing pretty well. I've also done some spatulas and cooking spoons that have been doing well. But this video really is all about just the bowls. But for all of the scrap wood, there was plenty of spatula blanks, spoon blanks. So all of that extra wood was not wasted. A good portion of one of my shelves that has just spatula blanks and box blanks and maybe some smaller hollow forms or something, more experimental pieces. But I really was focused on the bowls. And talking about scraps, there was so much extra scrap pieces that I ended up having to build 3 little movable firewood sheds to hold all of my offcuts and scrap pieces that couldn't be used for turning in any way. So that's all going to be used for firewood. I got the inspiration for that from Matthias Wandel's video titled Movable Firewood Storage, where he built them out of just 3 pallets that he could pick up with forks on his tractor. And that's exactly what I wanted. And using his video as inspiration, I've built 3 of those. And then the shavings, I know I've got some picture or video, but I think the highest the shavings ever got in one spot was it almost come up to my lathe bed. If I'm finished turning bowls, it can take a week or maybe a little longer to really build up a lot of shavings. But on one of those days where I'm rough turning, especially that pallet full of cherry, and I went through so many bowls so quickly, it would only take a day for it to be unwalkable in my shop. This video almost wasn't made. I almost scrapped the whole thing. My camera was stolen from inside my truck, and I thought the SD card that had all the footage was gone too, but that was actually sitting next to it or close by. I ended up finding that almost 2 months later underneath the seat. So that really brought this project back from the dead. Without that, I don't think I would have made this video. So there was a lot of highs and lows in this process, and now this video is coming out 2 months late. But being here at the end, I'm glad that I got the chance to make it. I think it's like 120 gigabytes of footage, and I've learned a lot. I've learned how to be more ergonomic with my turnings. I've learned how to save time and get things done quickly. I've had to build a lot of extra infrastructure, like those little firewood sheds and little tips and tricks that I wouldn't have thought about. If you just turn a couple bowls, it's no big deal. But when you're trying to turn 1,000, you really have to shave off the minutes here and there. They really add up. They can add up to days or even weeks of lost time. But I appreciate you stopping by the shop, listening to me talk for so long. But I just appreciate you watching. And there's a lot of things I didn't talk about in this video. There was so much I didn't talk about because it would have dragged this video on to an hour or more. And if you have any questions, please feel free, ask them in the comments. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. But again, I just appreciate you watching this long. It has been a journey.